Hello once again. In this video, I want to talk a little bit about Dreams by Olive Schreiner. There's a few different short stories in there, right? I think Dreams is the name of like the book of short stories that she wrote, and then within that, some of the stories that we had, In a Far Off World, um, Three Dreams in a Desert, and then that last one about the bees. I forget what they call that one. That one's kind of crazy. I don't really have a lot of interpretations of the bee story, although I do like it. I think it's cool. Um, okay, so I want to start off talking about In a Far Off World. So I wanted to talk about these stories because I think they're maybe a little more like abstract and possibly confusing, especially when compared to The Stranger. I think The Stranger is pretty straightforward, and I was pretty happy with our discussion threads on that. Not that I wasn't happy with the ones on Dreams. I think there's a lot of good stuff there too, and you should go back and look at both of those if you missed it. But I just wanted to pull out some of the stuff from Dreams. Okay, so in this first story, In a Far Off World, obviously, in the story, it tells us this kind of thing about like, living in this other universe where there's some kind of situation where they can like pray to some kind of god or whatever who will like fulfill their wish, but they have to make like a sacrifice, like a blood type sacrifice, I suppose, right? Because it tells about the woman going through the forest and she has to like cut herself, and then she's able to make a wish. The voice comes out of nowhere and talks to her, and she can make a wish, right? So the woman does this, and she wishes that the man who she is on this island. Does it say they're on an island? I don't know. But wherever she is, she's there with this man also, and she wishes that he might have what is best for him. I think is how she words it. So then, of course, she makes that wish. Everything's great. She goes back to wherever I guess their camp is, and then she sees the guy like on a boat going away, right, with someone else in the boat also. She wishes for him to have what's best, and then immediately, he's gone. And then she's very upset by this, obviously. And then the voice comes back, right? And the voice is like, well, what's wrong? And she's like, well, I, made the wish for what's best for him, and I was going to bring it to him, but now he's gone. And the voice goes, no, this is what's best for him. For him to leave is what was best, according to this godlike voice or whatever. And then the woman, kind of like takes it in for a minute, and then I think the voice asks, like, art thou contented? And she says, I am contented. And that's kind of the end of the story. So it's her being contented, right? Like accepting that, like, in order for the person that she loves, that, like, what's best for them is to be not with her, right? So I am always confused. I think there's two different ways you can look at this, right? And I think it fits in with how we were talking about some of the other stories, which is why I wanted to make this video. So I think we can see this as similar to like some of the stuff that's going on in Evelyn, right? I think we could view this as like she has to accept that she like makes a literal sacrifice, a literal blood sacrifice for someone else's happiness, and she doesn't get any of the benefits, right? So I wonder if this reinforces the kind of sexist idea that women should have to like neglect their own happiness in order to help others, right? And specifically men, and specifically like the family, the same way Evelyn is expected to take care of her family and like raise the kids and stuff, even though she has an older brother who's probably better positioned to do that. It's because of the gender is why it's expected. So I wonder if we see this story as endorsing this idea, right? Or like if the way that we're talking about this essay, right, at least from the gender perspective, is like, do these stories, for any of the stories, does it reinforce sexist ideology and sexist attitudes? Or does it undermine and go against sexist attitudes and sexist ideology? And whichever way you answer that question can be the thesis for a literary analysis paper like this, right? And then, we can get into why it matters in terms of the video where I try to explain how it could be like propaganda and like sending the message out and stuff like that, right? So I think there's a way of reading this as, yeah, embracing that kind of sexist idea that the woman is like, I have to sacrifice for others, but that's fine. I'll accept it. I'll be contented with it. And I think that'd be kind of a shitty message, right? That'd be kind of a bad message. Like, women sacrifice for other people. They'll never do anything for you. They'll leave when you need them the most, and that's fine. Be fine with it. Which, I'd kind of worry if that was the message. But I think there's another way of reading this. And again, I don't know which one of these is the more convincing answer. But I think there's another way of reading this is having something to say about the theme or like the topic that we see come up more in The Stranger and in Araby, which is about like possessive and controlling relationships, right? Now, in those stories, true, it's like the men in these relationships who are the more possessive, the more obsessive. But in here, we're looking from the point of view of the woman, right? So in this context, again, if we're talking about like sexist ideology and sexist attitudes, I think that sexist ideology would go along more with the possessive kind of relationship, the like borderline like emotionally abusive almost, like we see in The Stranger or something like that. So we could see what happens at the end of In a Far Off World as kind of a rebuke, as going against the idea of like the possessive relationship, right? I think we can see it more of like that, this kind of corny saying of like, if you love something, set it free or let it go. I think that's what the woman does in this story. So I think we could also read this as critical of the kind of possessive relationships that usually keep women down. Not that men are the only ones who could be like that. Obviously, that's not true. Um, but that like especially given the time period and all that, women had to deal with this more than men. Um, so yeah, I think we could also that would be more kind of a positive message, right? It would be undermining sexist ideology by saying no, like relationships should be about wanting the other person to be happy and stuff. So yeah, I'm never quite sure how to interpret this. I think you could see it as either of those ways. I'd be interested to read either argument. Okay, the other one I want to talk about Three Dreams in a Desert as well. So this one, I think it's very important to read this like metaphorically, right? So like the kind of framing is that there's someone like in a desert and they fall asleep and they have a dream, right? And then we get the dreams and they're kind of very abstract and strange and maybe a little confusing. And I would compare also. I think I asked about this maybe in the discussion, but I would compare the kind of like abstractness of the dreams here to like the very realistic stuff that we got from Araby and Evelyn, especially where like the details and the setting and stuff, it was all like very material. We knew about like how much money things cost and stuff like that, whereas like nothing could be farther from what's going on in these Olive Schreiner stories. So yeah, in the first one, when they say, there's one beast and this is man, and there's another beast that's woman, I think we should try to read these in terms of like what is it saying about like women's struggle for equality and feminism and stuff like that. So like in the first one, for instance, the first dream in that story, there's like the two beasts, one's man, one's woman. The one that's woman is like on the ground and like can't get up, and it has like a burden tied to its back or whatever, and the one that's man is just kind of standing off in the distance, like not really helping. So I think we can see how that's kind of like a metaphor for like gender relations, right? Where the female one is lower, is not equal, right? It's not also standing. And yeah, in the way that dream works, standing up is kind of a fill-in for like gaining some kind of equality or whatever. So it talks about how if the one that the beast that they're calling woman, like if it is able to just like struggle onto its knees, and then the one that's man would to see that it would then like realize what's going on and like help. But until then, like it doesn't understand and it won't help. So I think we can see how like what it's trying to say about like how like the struggle for women's freedom like needs to operate and the role that men can play, and it's kind of something like at the beginning it seems like men can't or don't really help, but then like if women can get the ball rolling on their own, then like men will probably come to their side and try to help or something like that. But I think you just need to read it in like its metaphorical terms, and then like the message that it's sending about gender and equality and like what women can do. I think that's maybe the way to look at these stories. Is like, what does the story think that women can or should do to try to move more towards equality. Like for instance, in the other one with the woman who talks to reason, right? And she has to like cross the river to get to the land of freedom, right? That one, I think very clearly we can see the metaphors of having to go. I think it's like the river of suffering to get to the land of freedom on the other side. So it does tell us, right, that there's a river of suffering that has to be gone through. The woman asks, like, well, what happens if I go in the river and I'm swept away and I don't make it? And the reason or whatever responds to her saying, like, well, you will have made a track up to the water for others to follow. And they use the example of like the way that locusts cross a river, which is apparently that some of them just dive in and they will get killed, but that their bodies form the bridge over which the rest will pass, right? And that's what the guy she's talking to says about like getting to this land of freedom, that you're the first, you need to go in and try your best, and maybe you'll make it but maybe not, but even if you don't make it, you can know that over your body the bridge will be built, that others will. And I think she asks like, who's going to go over this bridge? And he responds like, the entire human race. So that's something I like about that story too, is that they also kind of implicate men in this, that like by going through this river of suffering and all and trying to make it to the land of freedom, not only women are going to cross but also men, because kind of not talked about as much, but I think something else that you can see in these stories is that like sexism and like gender stereotypes are also very harmful to men, because like it also puts up an image that you're supposed to be whatever, strong and things, and if you don't fit into that, well, then it's going to be a problem psychologically or whatever. So like in terms of like freedom, they talk about like the whole human race being able to get there. And then there's all these other things in that story in terms of like she has the baby, and the guy tells her like, you can't bring the baby with you, you have to leave the baby here for you to go across the river. And like that brings up the question, and this is always kind of a thing in feminism, and I'm not sure where I stand on it personally, but there's always kind of been a debate in feminism about whether motherhood is like just another kind of oppression and a way to chain you down, and like it's going to keep you from getting politically involved and keep you from doing everything you can to dedicate yourself to the cause. Or there's the other side where they view motherhood as something like unique to women, and like something that should be embraced as being like a feminine thing or whatever. I don't know. There's like a more positive view of it, basically, right? Where motherhood is something unique and something special and important in the life of a woman, or all that. So there's kind of those two sides there. This story seems to come down on the side that like, yeah, you need to like leave that shit behind. That like the family will only it'll make it impossible. Like literally in the story, they say that it won't be possible to get to the land of freedom unless she leaves the child behind, right? And then at the end, the woman goes to try to cross the river. And then in the last story, it's just kind of this very optimistic vision of like women and men like holding hands and like treating each other as equals. So I do think we can say that the Olive Schreiner stories are pretty optimistic in terms of what can be achieved. But I think for an essay, a good essay topic would be like, what do these stories think women, or what do they think needs to be done for women to achieve equality? What like strategies of resistance do these stories advocate for? I think there could be another essay in there. Okay, just wanted to give you some thoughts on those little more confusing stories. Okay, that's all for now.